For 11 summers in a row, my parents drove me to my aunt's house in a town so small it didn't even have a traffic light, dropped my suitcase on her porch, hugged me for exactly 4 seconds, and then drove away in a car packed with beach towels, snorkeling gear, and my little brother's grinning face pressed against the back window. 11 summers. I used to tell myself it was because Aunt Carol needed help around the farm, or because I got carsick, or because there just wasn't enough room in the car. I believed a lot of lies for a long time, because the alternative, that my own parents simply didn't want me around, was too heavy for a kid to carry. It took me until I was 26 years old, standing in my dead aunt's kitchen holding a shoebox full of letters, to finally understand the truth. And once I understood it, I did something about it. This is the story of how a family's 20-year lie unraveled in a single afternoon, and how I made sure every single person who lied to me had to sit in a room and listen to the truth out loud. My name doesn't matter for this story, so let's just say I was the older child. My brother, Dylan, was 2 years younger than me, and from the time he could walk, he was the golden one. Not because he did anything special, he wasn't smarter than me, he wasn't kinder, he didn't work harder. He was just chosen. The way some kids simply are, for reasons parents never explain and children are never allowed to ask about. Every June, like clockwork, my mother would sit me down at the kitchen table with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and say the same rehearsed line, "You get to go stay with Aunt Carol this summer. Won't that be fun? She misses you so much." And every June, 3 days later, my father would load the car with suitcases, beach chairs, and a cooler, and the three of them, Mom, Dad, and Dylan, would drive off toward the coast, or the mountains, or one summer, all the way to Florida to a theme park I only ever saw in photographs Dylan brought back and showed me with a mouthful of funnel cake. I spent those summers in a farmhouse 2 hours outside of town with my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister. Carol never married, never had kids of her own, and lived alone except for 2 goats, a rooster with a personality disorder, and me, 3 months out of every year. I want to be fair here, because this story isn't really about Aunt Carol being cruel to me. She wasn't. In fact, looking back now, she was the only adult in my life who was consistently, quietly kind to me. She taught me how to count tomatoes and identify birds by their calls and change a tire. She let me stay up late reading with a flashlight under the porch light when I couldn't sleep. She never once made me feel like a burden. But every single summer, when I asked her, usually around week 2, when the loneliness would creep in and I'd start to cry at night, "Why don't Mom and Dad ever take me on vacation too?" she would get a strange, tight look on her face, glance toward the window like she was checking if someone was listening, and say the same thing every time. "That's a conversation for your parents, sweetheart. Not for me." I asked her that question probably 30 times over 11 years. I got the exact same answer every single time. Word for word. Like she'd rehearsed it. Like she was under orders. I didn't understand until much, much later that she was. By the time I was a teenager, I'd built my own explanation for why I was the one shipped off every summer while Dylan got Disney World, ski trips, and a 2-week cruise to the Bahamas the year he turned 12. The story I told myself was that I was simply harder to parent. I got carsick on long drives, that part was true, when I was 6. I didn't love the beach the way Dylan did. I was quieter, more introverted, happier with a book than a jet ski. So somewhere along the way, my parents must have decided the family vacations were for Dylan, and I was better off somewhere calm and quiet with Aunt Carol. It's a story I told myself because it let my parents off the hook. It let me believe they weren't choosing my brother over me, they were just accommodating my personality. Kids will build almost any narrative to avoid the far more painful, far simpler truth. Sometimes, parents just love one child more easily than the other, and they don't have the courage to admit it, even to themselves. I graduated high school. I left for college on a partial scholarship, worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, and slowly, quietly, drifted away from a family that had never quite felt like mine to begin with. Dylan, meanwhile, got his college tuition paid in full. Nobody ever explained that discrepancy to me either. When I asked, my mother said, "Well, you got the scholarship, so we figured you didn't need it as much." As if working myself into the ground for 4 years had been a lifestyle choice rather than a necessity nobody offered to spare me from. I want to be honest about something. I wasn't angry back then. Not really. I was numb. Numbness is what happens when you ask the same question for 18 years and never get a real answer. You stop expecting one. Then, 4 years ago, Aunt Carol died of a stroke in her sleep. She was 71. And because she had no children, no husband, and had apparently never updated her will after a falling out with my mother sometime in my early 20s that nobody had ever explained to me, the entire farmhouse and everything in it came to me. Me. Not my mother. Not my brother. Me. That should have been my first clue that there was something underneath all of this that I didn't understand yet. It took me almost a year to work up the courage to drive out to the farmhouse and start clearing it out. Grief does strange things to timelines. I finally went in the spring alone, with a rented truck and a box of garbage bags, expecting to spend a weekend hauling out old furniture and donating clothes. I found the shoebox on the top shelf of Carol's bedroom closet, behind a stack of quilts. It was an old shoebox, the cardboard soft with age, held closed with a rubber band that snapped the second I touched it. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten, folded in thirds, some in my mother's handwriting, a few in my father's, spanning almost 20 years. I sat down on the floor of that closet, and I read every single one. The first letter was dated the spring before my very first summer at Carol's house, when I was 5 years old. It was from my mother. Asterisk, Carol, I need you to do this for me. I know it's a lot to ask, taking her every summer, but Richard and I have talked about it, and we agree this is best for the family right now. Dylan needs the attention more than she does, you know how he struggles, and it's easier for us to focus on him without her there watching and comparing herself to him. She's more independent anyway. She'll adjust. Please don't tell her the real reason. It's kinder if she just thinks it's about logistics. Asterisk. I remember reading that sentence, she'll adjust, probably 6 times before it fully landed. Not because Dylan had a medical condition, not because of finances, not because of anything a 5-year-old could ever have understood or forgiven. It was a preference. A convenience. My mother had decided, when I was 5 years old, that raising 2 children equally was simply more effort than she wanted to spend, and that I was the more independent one, so I was the one who got cut. The letters continued, year after year. Some were logistics, dates, what clothes to pack, whether Carol needed gas money. But every single summer, there was a version of the same line. Asterisk, it's easier this way. She doesn't need to know. Dylan needs this more. Asterisk, one letter, from when I was 11, actually said, asterisk, she asked again why she can't come. I told her the same thing as always. I don't think she believes it anymore, but she's stopped pushing. Good. Asterisk. Good. My own mother wrote the word good next to the fact that her 11-year-old daughter had given up hoping to be loved the same way her brother was. The last letter in the box was dated the year I was 22, right around when Carol and my mother apparently stopped speaking. In it, Carol had written back, this one was a draft, or a copy she kept for herself, in her own looping handwriting. Asterisk, I have done this for 17 years because you asked me to and because I love that girl like she's my own. But I won't do it anymore, and I think what you and Richard did to her is something you're going to have to answer for one day. She is not a problem to be managed. She is your daughter. I'm done being the place you hide her. Asterisk. That was the falling out. That was why the house came to me. Aunt Carol had spent the last years of her life quietly furious on my behalf, and she never once told me, because she thought, rightly or wrongly, that it wasn't her story to tell. I sat on that closet floor for almost 2 hours. I didn't cry, not at first. I just felt something in my chest go very, very still and very, very cold. I want to be clear about something. I didn't want to scream at my parents. I didn't want a screaming match in a driveway that they could later reframe as me being dramatic or still holding onto old resentments. I had spent my entire childhood being systematically gaslit by two people who were very, very good at making their favoritism sound reasonable. I knew that if I confronted them with raw emotion, they would find a way to make it about my emotions, not their choices. So I decided to do something different. I decided to make them say it themselves, in front of witnesses, with the evidence already in the room. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was coming up in 3 months. My mother had been planning a big dinner for almost a year, extended family, old family friends, even my father's business partners. It was, by design, the kind of event where my parents performed the version of themselves they wanted the world to see, the loving couple, the devoted parents, the family everyone envied. I offered to help plan it. My mother was thrilled, genuinely thrilled, actually, which almost made what came next harder. She thought I was finally coming around. She had no idea I had spent 3 months quietly having every letter in that shoebox professionally scanned, organized by date, and printed into a bound presentation book. She had no idea I'd also reached out to my brother. That part surprised even me. I hadn't planned on bringing Dylan into it at first. Some small, wounded part of me wanted to blame him too, the golden child who got everything I didn't. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized Dylan hadn't chosen any of this either. He was 7 years old the first summer I got sent away. He didn't write those letters. He was a kid who got a vacation, not a kid who orchestrated a scheme. So 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner, I drove to see him. I brought the book. I watched my little brother, 31 years old now, married, a father himself, go pale, then red, then finally cry as he read our mother's handwriting confirming what he said he'd always had a weird feeling about but never wanted to believe. I used to ask Mom why you never came with us, he told me, voice shaking. She always said you didn't want to. I believed her. God, I actually believed her. Dylan didn't just believe me. He asked to be there when it happened. The anniversary dinner was held at a rented event hall. 60 guests, white tablecloths, a slideshow of family photos looping on a screen at the front of the room. A slideshow, I noticed with a bitter kind of amusement, that had exactly 4 photos of me and over 60 of Dylan. I waited until after dinner, after the champagne toast, after my father had stood up and given a speech about family being the most important thing in this world, that made my stomach turn. I waited until the room was warm and full and every important person in my parents' life was sitting there with a full glass in their hand. Then I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I thanked everyone for coming, said I had a small tribute prepared for my parents' anniversary, and asked if I could share it. My mother beamed. She actually reached for my father's hand under the table, thrilled that her difficult, distant daughter was finally doing something sentimental for the family. I had the first 3 letters printed onto large presentation boards, propped on an easel I'd set up near the head table under the excuse of a memory display. I read them out loud. Slowly. Clearly. Starting with the letter from when I was 5 years old. Asterisk, Dylan needs the attention more than she does. Please don't tell her the real reason. It's kinder if she just thinks it's about logistics. Asterisk. The room went silent in that specific, awful way a room goes silent when 60 people simultaneously realize they are witnessing something they were never supposed to see. I watched my mother's face drain of color in real time. I watched my father's jaw lock. I watched several of my parents' closest friends, women who had told me over the years how close our family was, how lucky my parents were to have 2 such wonderful kids, look down at their plates. I read 3 more letters. I read the one where my mother wrote good about my 11-year-old self giving up. I read Aunt Carol's final letter, the one where she said she was done being the place they hid me. Then I looked at my parents and I said the only unscripted thing I said all night. I'm not telling you this to ruin your anniversary. I'm telling you this because for 26 years, you let me believe there was something wrong with me. You let me build an entire personality around being the kid who didn't need love as much as her brother did. And the whole time, it was never about me at all. It was about what was easier for you. My mother tried to speak. She got out. It wasn't like that. Before my father actually put a hand on her arm to stop her, his own eyes wet, his face the color of old paper. Dylan stood up next to me. He didn't say much, he didn't need to. He just said, "I read the letters too, Mom. I believed you my whole life. I'm so sorry," he said to me, in front of everyone, "that I never once asked why you weren't there. I won't pretend there was some clean, cinematic ending where my parents fell to their knees and everything was suddenly fixed. Real families don't work that way, and honestly, I wasn't looking for that. I wasn't looking for forgiveness that night. I was looking for the truth to finally exist somewhere other than inside a shoebox in a dead woman's closet." My mother didn't speak to me again for almost 4 months. When she finally called, it wasn't an apology so much as an attempt at damage control. She was more concerned about what the guests now thought of her than what 20 years of lying had done to me. That told me almost everything I needed to know about how much had actually changed. My father, to his credit, eventually wrote me a real letter of his own. It wasn't perfect. It didn't excuse anything. But it was the first honest thing either of them had said to me in my entire life, and for now, that's the only thing I've decided to accept from them. Dylan and I, on the other hand, are closer now than we ever were as kids, which is a strange kind of silver lining neither of us expected. He tells his own children, my niece and nephew, about their great Aunt Carol every single summer now. He makes sure they know her name. As for me, I kept the farmhouse. I fixed up the porch where Carol used to let me read past my bedtime. Some nights, when it's quiet, I sit out there and I think about a woman who spent 17 summers quietly loving a child nobody else wanted to make room for, and who, even after everything, still believed the truth was worth protecting, even if it took her sending it to me from beyond the grave to finally set it free. If you've ever felt like the family member who is somehow always easier to leave behind, easier to explain away, easier to send somewhere else, I want you to hear this. It was never about you. It was about what was convenient for them. And the truth, once you find it, is always worth telling. Even at a dinner. Even in front of 60 people. Even 20 years too late. If this story hit close to home, let me know in the comments, was I right to expose it at the dinner, or should I have handled it privately? Subscribe for more real family drama stories every week, and I'll see you in the next one.